have been on my mind lately are those of the skeptic community. But before I get into them completely, I would like to talk about Gamergate and how it got cut and how much of a failure it was. The BioWare company has been infected with SJWs that not only write garbage plots, but they are also incapable and unskilled in doing basic animations. The loudest voices in Gamergate claim that it was a success, but we now have many gaming industries being taken over by the social justice warriors that Gamergate was supposed to be fighting against. Gamergate fell so far from its ideals, all they did was take over the indie market and sell the indie market to the AAA industry, and now unfortunately, there's no resistance force of good games being made. And I'm going to be getting into Russian history because a lot of Russian history, most of the politics in Russia, actually influence some of our politics today. We're going to talk about the development in Russia before it was called the Soviet Union, before the monarchists, aka the czars, and what gave Russia to the Marxists. There was two main groups. The Bolsheviks were the inner party of the radical far left, and the Mensheviks were basically the more wider, the liberal, the democratic, more moderate socialist group. This included laborers, unskilled laborers, skilled laborers, farmers, and they were basically the populist side of communism. And the Bolsheviks were the more elitist group of communism. And the Mensheviks during Russia thought that they were a part of the movement, but they were only a useful idiot to the Bolsheviks. They were just there for a convenience, as a puppet to kill the Tsar and his family, and the Bolsheviks were literally just playing them. And what was happening was that the left was being controlled by a huge faction of radicals. I don't know the exact number, but it was hundreds or possibly thousands of universities and college professors, teachers, journalists, left-wing think tanks, and most of the people that you'll find in middle management or as career corporals, but they were still a lot smaller than the majority of the people that consider themselves to be left-wing, progressive, liberal, or even some kind of Democrat. And with Gamergate and most of our modern culture wars, we have seen how the far left have become more and more radical. And in Russia, you saw that the Bolsheviks betrayed the farmers and deemed them unpatriotic and inconvenient to the Soviet state for not giving up their land, food, and property to the new socialist Soviet state, and for not working 22 hours. And so they were deemed inconvenient. Russia started off as this Marxist revolution to liberate the workers, the proletarian uprisings, but they ended up attacking the people they were supposed to liberate. And to be honest, that's the irony of every Marxist regime. It doesn't matter where you look, you would find that any Marxist regime attacks the proletariat while installing a system that creates a new privileged class. And we see this today with the current left, whether we call it social justice, whether we call it radical feminism or progressivism, whatever the label is, it changes every so often. But at the end of the day, it's important to understand that it's the same exact group, the same toxic, revolutionary, universalist type of people. And the Bolsheviks are just your university and college educated, but they have an IQ below 115. And so these people had the premises of now you get feminism so you don't have to get married, start a family, you could just have mindless sex. There's no nationalism, so you shouldn't have to serve in the military or volunteer at your local community. And don't be responsible because the state will maintain you forever. So there's a group of lazy, morally corrupt, nihilistic, anti-intellectual moderates that are the Mensheviks. And so they accepted the ideas of the Bolsheviks because in their mind they thought that these were just wonderful ideas. the ideas just sounded nice for them. And so today we got the radical left-wing SJWs, where you have to be a non-binary, bisexual, homosexual, transsexual, furry, and just a total sexual deviant and a pure degenerate who hates white men, straight people, successful people, lack concrete identity, oppose quality, despise beauty, embrace human frailty and weakness, and denigrate everything. And so they became the top. And because of how radical the left has gotten over the years, the moderate leftists are being alienated, thrown under the bus, so they're being pushed to quote unquote centrism, or to the center, I should say. And with Gamergate, it was pretty much an alliance, a very loose, but it turned out to be an unholy alliance between the right and the moderate left, which are the skeptics. The thing about the moderate left was that they just wanted to go back 8 or just a few years later, where white men weren't being attacked all the time, but they could still do drugs, go on welfare, be sexually loose, etc. They still wanted the false promises that the Bolsheviks were offering them, but the Mensheviks didn't want to admit that this was simply the inevitable decline. And now the right is about having principles, living by a greater principle: personal integrity, personal responsibility, self-improvement, being educated, and trying to pursue greatness, and of course having standards. And in Russia, the Mensheviks were opposed to the Bolsheviks because they were being starved to death, but the monarchists, the right, started confusing them as allies because they were against the Bolsheviks, but the Mensheviks were just as opposed to the right for having principles as the Bolsheviks. They hate the idea of living by a greater principle, self-improvement, or being a decent human being. They hate that just as much as the extreme left does. And in Gamergate, all of the moderate leftists, aka the skeptic community, because they rose to influence because, again, when you don't care about whether or not you're a hypocrite, or when you don't care about having standards or holding convictions, it's a lot easier for you to criticize people and denigrate people in an entertaining fashion. And so these are the voices that took over Gamergate and ousted all the people who are on the right and anyone who thought that having principles mattered, because these people only stand for only being nice, getting along with people instead of living up to a standard, and they're all about compromise. And so they took it over, declared it a victory, and some of them recently have tried jumping on the Trump train, but the dissident right, the alt-right, far-right, the true right understands that we shouldn't play games with them because they are treacherous. And they are not moderates. Hell, they're not even skeptical. They're not even skeptical about anything. They are just leftists. They're just not the leftists that are currently in power. And we're not going to play ball with these neocons, leftists, or as many of these people will call themselves, the skeptics. And so now, the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks are over here having their little slap fight about SJW this and that, covering very uninteresting topics that we have already discussed years ago, and we still continue to discuss. And let's just be honest, they don't hate the SJWs because of their ideas. They only hate SJWs because of their methods and for not being egalitarian enough. And so when you take something like gaming that got infested by the SJWs, the people that Gamergate was supposed to fight off, but they gave it away. They didn't just lose it, they gave it away. In the same way, Bernie Sanders gave away the Democratic nomination to Hillary Clinton and the establishment. The skeptic community are the type of people that will argue that political correctness is running rampant while being politically correct themselves. Try to tell people that there's a lot greater things in life you can pursue, and they will call you a right-wing SJW, which is an oxymoron. I honestly, and keep in mind this is only a joke, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Mensheviks called the Tsars and those who were fighting the Bolsheviks right-wing Bolsheviks. The skeptic community will claim to be anti-identitarian, but some of them still identify with a label. Now, I'm not saying that the skeptic community is homogenous. That's not what I'm saying at all. They're not even monolithic. But however, the skeptic community are opposed to the idea of you having moral standards and holding serious convictions. They are against the idea of you having principles. They hate all of these things as much as the extreme left. They hardly stand for anything. And if you're somebody on the right who believes that the skeptic community are allies in this war of ideas because they criticize SJWs and feminists, they basically just go after the low-hanging fruits and attack Islam only from time to time, well then you're sadly mistaken. These people only attack all those ideas because it stands in the way of them only. It stands in their way only. Many of them are advocates of the positive liberty and still want what the extreme left wants. They just hate the violence and the anti-white sentiments. But if you make a controversial, politically incorrect video, they'll throw you under the bus like they did to Rage After the Storm, because these people have been known to place their character over truth and over integrity. And some guy named Zers, whose channel I will link below the description so you can check him out, show him some support, he once pointed out that although they call themselves the skeptic community, I don't think it should be called a skeptic community because there's no such thing as a skeptic community. Roosh V Forums is a community. Return of Kings is a community. Bodybuilding forums are a community. The alt-right is a community. There's many different communities out here, and not all of them are going to be political, of course. But skepticism is nothing but endless criticism, and there really isn't anything wrong with criticism. We all need criticism. You can't live your life positively. You'll always need and have negativity. If you live your life positively, what if a guy comes in and mugs you? You need to judge people in life negatively and positively. Skepticism is wonderful, but it doesn't provide a purpose or a goal. It's nothing but endless criticism. But at some point, humans have to live by some sort of standard and by some sort of value. See, the skeptic community see themselves as people that can make the left credible again after all the damage that the SJWs have done and the entire alt-left. But you see that some of them, again, not all of them, keep in mind, not all of them, but some of them are making the same mistakes because at the end of the day, their ideologies are fundamentally flawed. Because if you don't accept the ideas that race isn't real and it's a social construct, or that you're born this way and that climate change in terms of human beings having an insignificant effect, if you don't accept these premises, then you are an enemy according to them.